This isn't asphalt. That's because I live in the redwood forest, so my nearest asphalt or cement is about a half a mile away or so, which means that I am the target demographic for the 2013 Audi Allroad. Basically, what they've done with the Allroad is they've taken a regular A4 Avant, they've jacked it up 1.5 inches, and they've added skid plates so that when a tree falls in my forest, and it's a small tree, I can just sort of run right over it in the winter. If you have a last generation Audi Allroad, then you'll notice that this one's a bit smaller because of course this is based on an Audi A4 this time rather than an Audi A6. We also don't get the air ride suspension that the A6 based Allroad got, which allowed you to adjust the height of the suspension. Instead we just get that fixed 1.5 inch boost in the rear. We get the track from an Audi A5, which is kind of an interesting touch here. So that's why this looks a little bit wider than a regular A4 Avant. That's part of why you get these little plastic covers here, because the car is a little bit wider in the track. Up front, Audi has swapped out the Billy the Big Mouth Bass grille, which looked very VW to me, for this more elegant baleen whale style grille. It definitely is a bit classier than the outgoing grille. Under the hood, we get Volkswagen Audi's 2-liter turbo engine. This is mated to ZF's 8-speed automatic transaxle, and of course, Audi Quattro all-wheel drive. Now, the important thing to note here under the hood is that these are the front shock towers, which means that the front wheels are right about here. That means that this engine is entirely in front of the front axle. That means that the A4, and by extension this A4 Allroad, is a decent amount nose heavy when you compare it to something like a BMW 328 or even a Volvo XC70, because in the Volvo XC line the engine is literally right on top of the front axle, and in this configuration the engine is entirely in front of that axle. Inside the Allroad, we get a very nice interior, which is something that you expect out of Audi, of course. Now, these seats aren't as comfortable as Volvo's XC70 or Volvo's S60 offerings. To be honest, they're not really that much more comfortable than regular Volkswagen fare. But the interior is definitely put together much nicer than most entries in this segment, including the BMW 328 and the Mercedes C300, which are sort of in this same segment, even though they don't produce a vehicle that's direct competition for this vehicle. Now that's really shown in the attention to detail on these gaps and seams. The parts quality, everything is nice and squishy, everything fits together nicely, everything feels very solid when you touch it and hold it. We'll go over the infotainment options in a short while, but style-wise, this smaller screen is fairly similar to the size that Volvo and Mercedes use in their products, which is not a bad thing really, because of course everyone else is using the same size screen. But BMW's new iDrive screen is enormous, and it is much better looking than Audi's MMI. And MMI is just not as intuitive to use as iDrive, or if I'm completely honest, as Volvo Sensus or Mercedes Command either. As you would expect with the Audi Allroad shrinking over its previous generation, headroom is definitely limited here in the back. I'm 6 feet tall, and if I sit upright in the rear seat, my hair is touching this roof because, of course, of this large panoramic sunroof. If you didn't have the sunroof in this particular vehicle, the headroom looks to be a little bit better, but it still is not a very big place to be. This front seat is adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, and I do like to drive in a more upright position than a number of other people I could mention. I do have 1 inch or 2 of leg room, knee room here, but my feet in these footwells, they're really quite constrained. I would have a difficult time, for instance, getting my foot out of that footwell, and well, this other seat's adjusted for a 6'4" passenger, and it's just not possible for me to sit behind him. Let's take a look at MMI now. First, we're going to go down the center console here, below the shifter, to the MMI control pad. You can see we have direct access buttons for nav, telephone, radio media, the car settings, and of course the main menu. We have a back button, and we have these 4 silver buttons here. These are contextual buttons, so if we go back up to the nav screen, you can see up here in the corners we have route, destination, info, and settings. Those correspond to these contextual buttons. So if we click those, you'll see that they light up. And we also have the usual rotary knob, as well as a little black joystick here in the center. It goes side to side, up and down, and of course clicks to enter. Over here we have the power button, volume knob, and track forward and backward. If we move to the steering wheel, we have a volume knob with push to mute, we have our voice command button, and we have a little button that repeats the last navigation instruction. On the other side of the steering wheel, not strictly part of that MMI interface, but tied with it, is Volkswagen and Audi's sort of LCD screen in the center of the gauge cluster, and that's what this little knob controls. It controls that little screen there, and the mode button switches back and forth between that and your trip computer and your phone. Now, while I say it helps control the MMI, if you're on here and you select, say, a different station on this particular screen or a different playlist on your iPod, and the main screen is on that corresponding media or radio mode, then the one screen will control the other. So, switching, using this knob to switch something here, and then you'll actually see it appear on this screen over here. As far as functionality goes, the system is well featured, and of course on the maps we get the latest and trendy things, which is this Google satellite view here. As you can see, we have satellite maps on this system, so we can zoom way in and you can see those buildings there. You can even go all the way down to a Google Street View if you're on a road that is covered by it. That means that the system does have a SIM card in it for data service. It's over here in this little open area. We have 2 SD cards and 1 SIM card. The data service costs $15 to $30 a month depending on the plan you're using, and it does allow access to things like Google searches for local businesses, as well as some other data services on the system. What we're looking at now is Google Earth, and that's really Audi's main reason for having that data card in this particular system. Aside from those available Google searches, we have access to Google Street View as well. As you can see, you can creep your neighbors by looking around. Now, my only complaint about this is that the data service is not particularly quick. You can see it keeps up with that scrolling around just about. But if you're driving along the highway, for instance, and you're at, say, a quarter-mile zoom level, which is not terribly close in on this system, then it takes a decent amount for that Google map to redraw, and sometimes it really makes it difficult to see where you're going because the entire map redraws so frequently. Now, the system doesn't seem to be as easy to use as iDrive or quite as intuitive as iDrive or as Sensus, which is Volvo's system. It is much better than Command, however, and that's due somewhat to this knob arrangement here, because you have this little joystick and you have these command buttons that you can't really see very well from the steering wheel. So they're not up on the dash, they're not positioned high in the center console, they're kind of far back, as well as this volume knob. So you do have to kind of look down a bit more often than you would in some of these competitive systems. And because there are so many buttons in this arrangement, you can't really feel around for them as easily as you can in BMW's iDrive. Overall, Audi's MMI scores very well. It has some nice features, it's fairly snappy, and fairly easy to use once you've figured it all out, although the learning curve is a bit steep. It's not as intuitive as iDrive or even Volvo's Sensus system, but it is a lot nicer than Mercedes Command, which is definitely getting a bit old. As you would expect with any modern European wagon, trunk comfort is very good. We have a very nicely finished trunk compartment. We have some nice cargo tie downs, some cute little cubbies back here with little nets to keep your stuff in. Decent amount of luggage room. This is the largest bag you can carry on a domestic flight. But overall, this vehicle is still a decent amount smaller than a Volvo XC70. And of course, this sloped rear hatch means that you can't get as much cargo in the car as you can in a Volvo XC70. Out on the road, the Audi Allroad is essentially just like a regular Audi Avant that's been jacked up a tiny bit, because that's pretty much what it is. That means that we still go 0 to 60 in about 6.5 seconds or so, and that's with this ZF 8-speed transmission. It still handles fairly nicely, it's still fairly responsive, the steering is still fairly numb, but there are some key differences. Because we have that wider track, it helps make up for that height increase just a little bit, but the Audi Allroad still feels definitely tall out on the road. Again, not very much unlike the Volvo XC70, which also feels a bit more SUV-like out on the road. In truth, I don't know if that many people would be cross-shopping the Allroad with the Volvo XC70, however, and there's kind of a reason for that. The XC70 is a decent amount larger. If the Audi Allroad was still based on an A6, then I could see that comparison cross-shopping going a little bit better, but as it is, we have a smaller vehicle with a 4-cylinder engine under the hood versus Volvo's XC70, which is considerably larger, considerably cushier, and has your choice of either a naturally aspirated inline-6 or a twin-scroll turbo inline-6, I should say. Volvo doesn't use V6s. And that makes the XC70 more refined, if I'm honest, as far as a luxury car goes out on the road. The Allroad handles very well and performs very nicely, but there really is no disguising that a 4-cylinder engine lurks underneath the hood. And I'm really even comparing that to something like the BMW 328i, which is very whisper quiet out on the road. You really can't tell that that's a 4-cylinder engine unless you really stab the throttle hard. But in this Audi A4, you can tell that this is a 4-cylinder engine pretty much all the time. And in comparison, the Volvo XC70 is much smoother with its inline 6. It's also significantly more powerful, as Volvo's XC70 T6 can be had in either 300 or 325 horsepower varieties. We did take this car out on a mild off-road course, which was mostly just a dirt road with severely rutted surfaces and a lot of washboard dirt road as well. And it became obvious that this system performs very well. Definitely has a rear wheel bias. Audi tells us it's normally about 70% of the power to the rear, and that is completely obvious when you're out there on the road. It does feel a bit nicer to drive than front wheel drive bias systems, but a little bit less sure-footed. That lack of sure-footedness isn't just because of the rear wheel drive bias, however. It's because to shuttle power left and right in this particular vehicle, the system has to use the ABS system. And it does take a little bit for that system to act. I'm not exactly clear why, it just seems to be the way that Audi has programmed the software, but it does allow a decent amount of wheel spin before the system does engage and sends power to the other side of the vehicle. Fuel economy in the Audi Allroad is fairly good. We've been averaging about 28.5 miles per gallon on our 680 miles with the car. And of course, my daily commute involves going up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass, some rural highway, some mountain highway, plenty of stop-and-go traffic, city traffic, and of course a little bit of freeway as well. That fuel economy is fairly similar to Volvo's recently revised T5 all-wheel drive system. And I've got to say that Volvo's T5 engine even is more refined than Audi's 2-liter turbo. That extra cylinder just helps it be a little bit smoother and a little bit less economy car sounding. The Audi Allroad starts just under $41,000, but be careful of that options list because the price does escalate rather rapidly. If this seems a bit more expensive than Volvo's XC70, then you're right, because the XC70 starts just around $34,000. But the options list is not as complete as the Audi Allroad's base package. Comparably equipped, they get rather close together, except for the Audi XC70 T6 all-wheel drive with the 325 horsepower T6 engine option, because that is a bit more expensive than the Audi Allroad, although it is a decent amount more powerful. Now, the base XC70 is not as fast as the Allroad, despite having a few more horsepower, because it doesn't have a turbocharger and because it doesn't have this 8-speed automatic transmission, but the T6 is significantly more powerful. Other than the Volvo competition, I'm really not quite clear what you'd cross-shop with this. I suppose if you were looking for something like a Subaru Outback, but you wanted something that was nicer on the inside, nicer on the outside, and had a snazzier brand, then you'd go for the Audi. But other than that, it really stands alone as a particular unique entry in this segment. And if I'm allowed to pontificate for just a little bit here, I would rather have this than the Audi Q5, and I would rather have this than a wide variety of near luxury SUVs because it is not that much less practical than most luxury small SUVs. It's easier to park, it's a lot easier on the wallet when it comes time to fill it up, and it's cheaper to insure. So who's the Audi Allroad for? I think ideally it's for that Subaru shopper that wants to step up to something just a little bit more luxurious than their old Outback. But honestly, if you're shopping for a small luxury SUV, you should give one of these a look. If I'm allowed to pontificate for a short while, this makes a lot more sense to me than most luxury SUVs because you're not really going to take your luxury SUV seriously off-roading. And if you're just looking for something that does the school run nicely, has room for a bicycle in the back, something that you can take your skis to the snow with you in, then this does the job just as well as any SUV. It doesn't have that much less storage room in the back than most small SUVs, and it's nicer to drive, if I'm perfectly honest.